Hi, it's Peachy, and welcome to 2025's Women's History Month Creative Sims. Through the month of March, I will spotlight a woman who has made an impact on our history. In between the weekly installment, take a look at one of these videos from years past. I hope you discover some information you didn't know about a very powerful woman from history. Now let's go. The girl who would later take on the pen name Nellie Bly and help launch a new kind of investigative journalism was born Elizabeth Jane Cochrane on May 5, 1864 in Cochrane Mill, Pennsylvania. The similarity between the surname and her birthplace was no coincidence. The town was named after its most prominent citizen, her father, Michael Cochrane, a wealthy landowner, judge, and businessman. He had 10 children by his first wife. After she died, he married again and had 5 more children, the third of which was Elizabeth, considered the most rebellious child in the family. Her father died when Elizabeth, nicknamed Pink or Pinky, was only 6 years old. The death was a terrible financial blow, as he left no will to protect the interests of his second family. A year after his death, Elizabeth's family had to auction off its mansion and was thrown into hard times. Elizabeth's mother, feeling the need for some financial security, hastily entered into a disastrous marriage to a man who abused her. When she filed for divorce, Elizabeth testified at the trial. Wanting an independent life and looking for a way to support her mother, Bly went to Indiana Normal School at the age of 15 to train to become a teacher, one of the few professions open to women of the time. But after one semester, she was told there was no money to continue. She then moved with her mother to Pittsburgh, which would be Pink's home for the next 7 years. She helped run a boarding house, yet had a hard time finding full-time work. Her dream of finding work as a writer seemed distant when she read a series of columns by the Pittsburgh Dispatch's Quiet Observer, or QO, the pen name for Erasmus Wilson, Pittsburgh's most popular columnist. Wilson wrote that women belong in the home doing domestic tasks such as sewing, cooking, and raising children, and called the working woman a monstrosity. Elizabeth, familiar with the many young women who had to work to survive in industrial Pittsburgh, read the column with anger and wrote a letter to the newspaper. The paper, impressed with the spirit of the girl, hired her and gave her the pen name Nellie Bly after the Stephen Foster song. In a glimpse of her work to come, Bly wrote her first story about the difficulties of poor working girls. In her second, she called for the reform of the state's divorce laws. She then did a series about the factory girls of Pittsburgh. Despite her investigative tendencies, the editors at the newspaper relegated Bly to the women's page and assigned her stories about flower shows and fashion. Bly found a way out by convincing the editors to let her be a foreign correspondent in Mexico, where she observed and then sent back stories about the everyday lives of the Mexican people. When she returned, the Dispatch again confined her to the women's page. That was enough. Nellie left a note for Wilson by clearly stating her plans. "Dear QO, I'm off for New York. Look out for me, Bly." Wanting to write pieces that addressed both women and men, Bly began looking for a newspaper that would allow her to write on more serious topics. She moved to New York City, but found it extremely difficult to find work as a female reporter in the male-dominated field. Bly stormed into the office of New York World, one of the leading newspapers in the country. She wanted to write a story on the immigrant experience in the United States. The editor, John Pulitzer, declined that story, but he challenged Bly to investigate one of New York's most notorious mental asylums, Blackwell's Island. Bly not only accepted the challenge, she decided to impersonate a mad person to gain admission and expose firsthand how patients were treated. She came back from Blackwell's Island 10 days later with stories of cruel beatings, ice-cold baths, and forced meals that included rancid butter. Bly's six-part series on her experience in the asylum was called The 10 Days in the Madhouse and quickly made Bly one of the most famous journalists in the country. Her reporting on life in the asylum shocked the public and led to increased funding to improve conditions in the institution. Furthermore, her hands-on approach to reporting developed into a practice now called investigative journalism. Bly continued to produce regular exposés on New York's ills, such as corruption in the state legislature, unscrupulous employment agencies for domestic workers, and the black market for buying infants. Her straightforward yet compassionate approach to these issues captivated audiences. In the years ahead, Bly exposed both corruption and injustice of poverty, revealing shady lobbyists, the ways in which women prisoners were treated by police, the inadequate medical care given to the poor, and much more. The young reporter always sided with the poor and the disenfranchised, as when she went to Chicago in 1894 to cover the Pullman Railroad strike and was the only reporter who told of the strike from the perspective of the strikers. Bly's personality was always part of her stories, and she injected her reactions, feelings, and observations into whatever the subject she was covering. Bly's fame also opened up doors of the rich and famous, and she profiled the likes of boxer John L. Sullivan, suffragist Susan B. Anthony, and the anarchist Emma Goldman. Perhaps the peak of Bly's fame came when she took a whirlwind trip around the world in 1889 to beat Phileas Fogg, the fictional hero of Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. Traveling by ship, train, and burro, she returned back to New York in 72 days, 6 hours, and 11 minutes as a celebrity, cheered by crowds of men as well as women. At the age of 30, Bly married a 70-year-old industrialist named Robert Seaman. She lived as a New York City matron until her husband died 10 years later. She ran the business until it went bankrupt and then returned to reporting. She picked up where she had left off, using her forum as a journalist to find homes for abandoned children, covering World War I from Europe, and continuing to shed light on major issues that impacted women. She was employed by the New York Journal when she died from pneumonia in 1922 at the age of 57. In a tribute after her death, the acclaimed newspaper editor Arthur Brisbane remembered Bly as the best reporter in America. Thank you for watching the creative Sims of this powerful woman. Did you learn something you didn't know when the video first started? I hope so. Thanks for watching, and please share the video so others can learn about this woman and the others in the playlist. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever time you're watching this. Be safe out there. Bye for now.